The cry came suddenly, slicing through the sterile silence of the hospital corridor. Emily's heart skipped, her breath shallow, as if the sound alone tore open a wound she had buried. A nurse whispered, "Emily, the child bears your name," and her world tilted violently. She stumbled, clutching the cold railing, her mind screaming denial while her lips muttered, "That's not possible." Every step echoed louder, the walls pressing in, as if the past she had worked so hard to bury clawed its way back into the light. In the courtroom hours later, Robert's face turned white when the judge's voice cut the air. "This child carries your blood." Emily's hands trembled against the wooden bench, and her voice cracked. "No, not again, not me." The silence that followed felt heavier than any scream, and her heart broke into pieces that refused to stay hidden. The nightmare had found her again, and this time there was no escape. Emily sat motionless in the dim hospital waiting room, her thoughts circling like vultures. The sound of the baby's cry clung to her, echoing in her skull. A stranger's child had ripped open memories she had sworn were long buried. Her chest rose and fell in uneven gasps, as if the walls themselves were pressing her down. Robert's cold eyes haunted her, and his silence screamed louder than words. He knew, she whispered to herself, her voice breaking under the weight of disbelief. The room felt colder, the fluorescent light humming against her skull. She pressed her palms to her face, fighting the truth clawing at her. Nothing felt real, yet everything was too sharp to ignore. Robert stood in the hallway, his shadow long against the pale walls, his jaw clenched as if it held back every truth. The judge's words had carved into his pride, exposing a truth he had buried too deep. His fists curled at his sides and he whispered, "Not mine." But the denial rang hollow, weaker with every passing second. He felt the sting of the nurse's gaze, the way her eyes held quiet accusation. He turned, avoiding Emily's broken silhouette in the waiting room. Every step away felt heavier, as if chains pulled him back toward a child he did not want but could no longer deny. The nurse lingered near the doorway, her hands gripping a clipboard, her lips tight with secrets she wished she didn't hold. She had seen countless storms within these walls, but this one felt heavier. She whispered, "The child deserves truth." Though no one listened. Emily's trembling frame haunted her eyes, and Robert's silent fury made her pulse race. She knew that silence could save reputations, but it could also destroy lives. And tonight, it seemed both were already unraveling. Emily's body shook as she finally whispered, "I can't do this again." The words bled into the silence, sharp as glass. Her past pressed down on her chest, memories of abandonment, betrayal, and nights filled with unanswered cries flooding back. She thought she had outrun them, buried them in a place no one could touch. But now, with a child's existence pulling her back, every scar felt raw again. Tears blurred her vision, the world bending out of focus. She pressed her forehead against her knees, the whisper of her own voice, the only anchor she had left. Emily sat alone in her apartment, the city lights flickering beyond the window like restless stars. Her chest ached with every breath as memories she had buried clawed back to the surface. She whispered, "I promised myself never again," her voice brittle, almost breaking. The baby's cry still echoed in her ears, louder than the traffic below. Her reflection in the glass looked unfamiliar, haunted by past choices and broken trust. She pressed her hand against the cold pain, whispering to herself, "I don't deserve another chance." Yet her heart throbbed with a question she couldn't silence. What if this was her chance to heal, even if it tore her apart? Robert paced in his office, shelves of books towering around him, the glow of a desk lamp sharpening the anger in his eyes. His thoughts twisted, colliding with pride and denial. "This cannot define me," he muttered, slamming his fist against the desk. The judge's words replayed mercilessly, each syllable cutting into his certainty. He thought of Emily's trembling voice, her broken frame in the courtroom, and for a fleeting second, guilt slipped into his chest. He shoved it away, whispering, "Shall ruin me if I let this stand." The truth felt like a blade, and he was determined to dull its edge before it carved his life apart. The nurse sat in her small kitchen, a steaming cup untouched on the table, her hands trembling around the porcelain. Her voice cracked as she whispered to the empty room. Secrets always come back. She had carried too many over the years, watching families crumble when the truth clawed its way free. Emily's tear-streaked face lingered in her thoughts, and Robert's denial echoed in her ears. She knew that silence had consequences, but so did truth. She lowered her head into her palms, whispering, "How much pain is mercy worth?" Her heart bore the weight of a decision that could shatter more than one life. Emily's mother stood in the doorway of her daughter's apartment, her voice sharp with judgment. "You bring shame again," she hissed, her eyes cold and unforgiving. Emily felt her body shrink under the weight of her mother's words, old wounds splitting open. Her voice faltered as she whispered, "I didn't choose this." But the accusation in her mother's glare burned hotter than fire. She turned away, clutching the edge of the counter for balance, her chest heaving with grief. The silence that followed was heavier than any scream, and Emily knew the past she thought she had escaped was alive again in every harsh word. Emily collapsed onto her bed, the sheets crumpled beneath her weight, her body shaking with quiet sobs. "I'm not strong enough," she whispered into the darkness, her voice almost lost. Yet in the hollow of her grief, the image of a small, fragile child burned through her tears. She pressed her hand against her chest, her heart pounding against her palm, as if urging her not to give up. Her breath hitched, and she whispered, "Maybe love is stronger than fear." The room swallowed her words, leaving only the rhythm of her sobs. For the first time, she dared to imagine holding the child, and wondered if it might heal her shattered soul. Emily walked through the market square, the whispers clinging to her like smoke. Neighbors leaned closer, their eyes sharp with judgment, their voices too low to be missed. "She hides shame," one hissed, and Emily's shoulders stiffened. She pulled her coat tighter, but the words burrowed into her skin. A man she once called a friend turned away, pretending not to see her. Her chest burned and she whispered, "I can't outrun this." Every step felt heavier, each face a reminder that society's scorn was merciless. She fought to keep her tears hidden, but her silence betrayed her trembling strength. Robert sat across from his lawyer, the air heavy with tension. "You'll deny everything," the lawyer insisted, his voice clipped. Robert's eyes narrowed, his pride stoking the fire. "She won't ruin me," he said coldly, his tone sharp as steel. Yet beneath his words, unease gnawed at him. He imagined Emily's face in court, her trembling voice exposing truths he wanted buried. The lawyer's pen scratched against paper, sealing strategies in ink, while Robert whispered to himself, "This ends on my terms?" But deep down, his denial was cracking, and the truth pressed against him like an unwelcome shadow. Emily's mother stood in the living room, arms crossed, her eyes blazing with disappointment. "You'll destroy us again," she said, her tone cutting deep. Emily's voice trembled as she whispered, "I never asked for this." The old wounds between them cracked open wider, years of resentment spilling into the present. Her mother's silence felt heavier than her words, a judgment that weighed down every breath. Emily's chest tightened, her heart begging for compassion that never came. She whispered, "Why can't you see me?" But the answer was written in her mother's glare. Shame was stronger than love. The nurse walked with Emily through the hospital corridor, her voice low and cautious. "The child deserves truth," she murmured, her eyes shifting nervously. Emily's throat tightened, her lips pressing into silence. Every step echoed like judgment, and her body shook as if every wall knew her shame. The nurse placed a hand on her arm, whispering, "You are stronger than you think." Emily's gaze fell to the floor, fear fighting against a fragile flicker of hope. For a moment, the silence between them was heavy with unspoken choices that could break or rebuild everything. Robert stormed into his father's study, his voice sharp. "This child is not mine," he shouted. His father, seated by the fire, lifted his gaze, eyes cold with authority. "Blood tells no lies," he said, his tone final, unyielding. Robert's chest heaved, anger colliding with fear, his fists clenched tight. He whispered, shall destroy me. But his father's silence was more condemning than words. The fire cracked, shadows stretching across the walls, and Robert felt the weight of legacy press down like chains. In that moment, he realized his fight was not just against Emily, but against a truth no denial could bury. Emily sat at the kitchen table, her hands trembling around a letter she had found hidden in her mother's drawer. The words blurred through her tears, but the truth struck with cruel clarity. The child's mother was not who she believed. Her chest heaved as she whispered, "It was never mine." Her breath broke into ragged sobs as years of confusion crystallized into betrayal. Every memory twisted, her mother's silence unraveling into lies that now suffocated her. She pressed her palm to her mouth, choking on grief and rage. Her voice cracked as she murmured, "You knew all along." Her mother entered, her face pale, her voice low and unsteady. "I did it to protect you," she said, but the words sounded hollow. Emily's hands shook as she slammed the letter against the table. "You lied to me," she whispered, her voice breaking into fury. Her mother's eyes glistened with tears, yet her jaw stayed rigid. "The world would have destroyed us," she muttered. Emily's heart cracked beneath the weight of betrayal, her voice trembling as she asked, "So you destroyed me instead?" The silence that followed was sharper than any blade. Robert stood in the hallway, listening through the half-open door. His chest tightened as the words cut into him. The child's parentage was tangled deeper than he had known. His hand pressed against the wall, his jaw clenching as truth shattered his last defense. "It was never hers." Emily's voice echoed inside him, and for the first time, fear washed through his arrogance. He whispered to himself, "Then whose?" The hallway spun, his certainty collapsing like glass. He staggered back, the ground beneath him suddenly unstable, every choice he had made now poisoned by lies he had once embraced. Emily's mother's voice broke as she whispered the truth. "The child is not yours. It is your sister's." Emily staggered backward, her body shaking as if the ground had disappeared. Her voice cracked into a scream. "You hid this from me." The weight of years of secrecy crashed down, her chest burning with betrayal. Her mother reached out, pleading, "I wanted to save you." But Emily recoiled, her face twisted in grief. The revelation tore apart the fabric of everything she had believed, leaving her raw, gasping, and broken under the crushing truth. Emily collapsed against the wall, sliding to the floor, her tears spilling freely. Her voice trembled as she whispered, "All this time I thought it was me." Her hands clutched at her chest as if to hold the pieces of her heart together. The nurse entered silently, her eyes heavy with truth she could no longer conceal. She knelt beside Emily, her voice soft. "I knew, but I could not speak." Emily's gaze lifted, hollow and raw, her lips trembling. "You all stole my life," she whispered. The room swam in silence, the betrayal wrapping itself around her like chains she could never escape. Emily stormed into the courtroom, her footsteps echoing like thunder. Her face was pale, but her eyes burned with fire. She pointed at Robert, her voice breaking through the silence. "You knew, and you let me drown in lies." Robert's jaw tightened, his fists clenched at his sides, but his silence betrayed him. The judge's gavel struck, demanding order, yet the chaos inside Emily could not be silenced. Her chest rose and fell, as if every breath was a battle. "You let them destroy me," she shouted, her voice trembling, "and now I will not stay silent." Robert's father rose from his seat, his voice thundering over the courtroom. "Enough!" His stern gaze locked on Emily, but his words cut his own son deeper. "Blood binds us all, and blood cannot be denied." Robert's lips curled with anger, his voice raw as he shouted, "I will not carry shame for her mistakes." The room erupted, voices colliding like crashing waves, the judge's gavel lost in the storm. Emily's tears streamed, her voice breaking as she whispered, "It was never mine." The words carried like a blade, silencing even the loudest protest. The nurse stepped forward, her voice trembling but clear. The truth must be spoken. She held a document in shaking hands, her eyes locking on the judge. "I witnessed everything," she said, her voice cracking but firm. Emily's breath caught as hope flickered through her despair. Robert's face drained of color, his body rigid with fear. The judge leaned forward, his expression sharp, his voice cutting through the uproar. "Speak, and let this court know the truth." The silence that followed felt like the world holding its breath, waiting for the final blade to fall. The nurse's voice cracked as she confessed, "The child is not Emily's," and Robert knew. Gasps rippled through the room, a wave of disbelief. Emily's knees buckled, her hand gripping the bench for balance as her tears flowed. Robert slammed his fist against the table, shouting, "Lies!" But his voice trembled, betraying the truth he could not hold back. The judge's gavel struck hard, his voice booming. Silence in this court. Emily's sobs broke into a scream, raw and uncontained. "You all stole my life," she cried, the words shattering the fragile illusion of order that had once bound them all. Emily rose, her body shaking, but her voice carried power she had never known. "You broke me," she cried, her eyes locking on Robert and her mother. "But you will never erase me." Her words sliced through the silence, leaving the room frozen. Robert's face contorted with fury, his father's glare turned into shame, and the nurse's tears streamed openly. The judge lowered his gavel, his voice firm but soft. "The truth has spoken." Emily's chest heaved as she whispered, "I will not run anymore." For the first time, her fear gave way to strength, and her voice no longer trembled. The courtroom emptied slowly, leaving only echoes of shattered lives behind. Emily sat slumped at the bench, her tears drying into silence. Her body felt hollow, but her chest carried a strange steadiness. The judge's words still lingered. "The truth has spoken," she whispered to herself. "Then I must carry it." For the first time, she no longer ran from the past, but faced it head-on. Her hands trembled, yet her gaze steadied on the door where Robert had stormed out. She breathed deeply, fragile but resolute. The storm had broken, and though the wreckage remained, she still stood. Robert stood alone in the courthouse steps outside, the cold night air biting against his face. His father lingered in the distance, gaze filled with quiet disappointment. Robert's fists clenched, his voice bitter. "They've ruined me." Yet beneath the anger, his eyes betrayed fear. For the first time, pride felt heavier than freedom. He turned away from his father's stare, the silence between them louder than any judgment. His chest tightened, and for a fleeting second, regret threatened to break through his armor. He muttered, "What have I done?" But the night swallowed his words whole. The nurse walked quietly down the hospital corridor, her footsteps soft against the polished floor. She carried no papers, no secrets, only guilt heavy in her chest. Her voice whispered to herself, "I thought silence would save them." Her reflection in the glass doors stared back with accusing eyes. For years she had convinced herself her choices were mercy, but tonight they felt like betrayal. Her hands trembled as she reached for the door, as though truth itself had carved scars into her soul. She exhaled shakily, whispering, "I can't undo what I've done." Emily sat across from her mother in the dim apartment living room, silence stretched between them. Her mother's face was worn, guilt etched in every line. Emily's voice was quiet but sharp. "You broke me." Her mother's lips quivered, but no excuse escaped. For the first time, Emily did not shrink under her mother's gaze. Instead, she lifted her chin, her tears steady but no longer weak. "You cannot undo it," she said softly, "but I will not let it define me." Her mother lowered her head, the weight of her choices pressing her into silence. The fragile bond trembled, but it no longer owned Emily. Alone in her bedroom, Emily lay on her bed staring at the ceiling, her breath steady but heavy. The city's muffled hum seeped through the window, a reminder that life moved on outside her pain. She whispered into the darkness, "I choose to carry it." Her hand pressed to her chest, as if to seal her vow. The past had scarred her, betrayal had broken her, but the child's existence had forced her to rise. "I will not let fear own me," she whispered again, this time stronger. Tears glistened in her eyes, but for the first time, they carried not despair, but resolve. Emily walked through the hospital nursery, the soft glow of night lamps illuminating rows of cribs. Her steps slowed as she approached the child who had changed everything. She pressed her hand against the glass, her chest rising and falling with trembling breaths. Her voice cracked as she whispered, "You were never mine, yet you broke me open." The baby stirred softly, a fragile reminder of innocence untouched by betrayal. Emily's tears fell silently, her face etched with both loss and longing. She turned away, her shoulders heavy with sorrow, knowing she could never reclaim what was taken. Robert stood outside beneath the cold night sky, his suit jacket loosened, his tie undone. He tilted his head back, the weight of his father's judgment pressing harder than the air itself. His voice was low, almost broken. "I thought I could bury it." His father's silence lingered beside him, heavy and condemning. Robert's fists unclenched slowly, his breath uneven, as though he was drowning in his own choices. For the first time, the arrogance had fallen away, leaving only a fractured man staring at a future he no longer controlled. He whispered, "The truth has no mercy." Emily's mother sat alone in her apartment, the silence pressing in like punishment. She clutched an old photograph, her hands trembling. Her voice broke as she whispered, "I wanted to protect you." But the words rang hollow, even to her own ears. Guilt carved into her features, her shoulders slumped as though carrying the weight of every lie she had built. Tears slipped down her cheeks, and she pressed the photo against her lips. "I destroyed you instead," she murmured, her voice collapsing into sobs that filled the lonely room. The nurse stood by the hospital window, city lights flickering in the distance. Her reflection stared back with eyes filled with shame. "I carried silence too long," she whispered, her voice trembling. Her hands pressed against the glass as though she could hold on to something that no longer existed. She exhaled slowly, her tears sliding down her cheeks. For years she had convinced herself she was protecting lives, but now she saw only the destruction she had helped create. Her voice cracked. The truth never stays buried. Her body sagged with exhaustion, but her confession had left her bare. Emily returned to her apartment, the city silent around her. She sat on the edge of her bed, the moonlight cutting across her face through the blinds. Her voice was a whisper, but it carried all the weight of her journey. "I never wanted to be a mother, until she called me Mama." Her tears shimmered as she closed her eyes, the ache in her chest a haunting mixture of loss and fragile strength. She lowered her head, clutching the fabric of her coat like it was the only piece left of herself. The silence that followed was unbearable, lingering like a wound that would never close.